I know everyone's keen to move on. If you're hungry like I am, last one of the day, let's crack through. So welcome to Deliver Your Deliverables, how to get a development team thinking logistically. A reminder, this is an open session. I'm going to be generalizing in this talk, and when asking questions at the end, please consider if you can generalize too. All right, let's get cracking. You should have deliverables and you should deliver them. It's revolutionary and groundbreaking, so I'll do for the end of the talk. But in practice, this is what I think that means. We'll cover a concept called logistical thinking and its counterpart, functional thinking. Now, if you Google these things, you're not going to get a lot about them, but hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll understand what I'm driving at when I discuss these concepts. And to do that, we'll look at who should have deliverables, what is good practice for a deliverable, a general pipeline for those deliverables, and how to integrate these things with common project management processes. So it was about 2 years ago when I realized and something clicked for me about what I was going to look at next in my professional life, this subject of this talk. I'd been given the opportunity to take on a wider leadership role in production after being the producer for Levels on Sackboy: A Big Adventure. And now we were going to look at the way in which we could bring some sense of the process success we had with Levels on Sackboy to features in general on future projects. And I felt I understood how I wanted to tackle this issue. When we designed features, we had a really robust and clear process for that, but I felt there was an issue where we would dive at a full specification for certain things, sometimes specifying work 18 or 20 months away from where we currently were, and that if we injected a feature mapping stage into this, we could have some success. We could take something that's a traditional feature level item, such as a minigame system, break it down into sub-features, maybe a prototyping stage for a minigame system, and eventually to deliverables like wide prototyping on a collection minigame. And of course, if we could successfully break this specification down into sub-features, maybe we could save time anyway, despite doing this extra step, because we could defer certain aspects of the design till later when we understood more. At the time, we were using Azure DevOps ADO, and the hierarchy we had was tasks, deliverables, sub-features, features, and themes. I was working with a designer who was going to lead the effort on features. I said, Adam, what I want to do is once you've done your competitive analyses and your feature overview, before you go into the detail of the design, I want to break that design down into sub-features and map them out. And he said, Chris, what are you on about? He said, I think I understand what you mean, but I'm a little bit confused because you said the word sub-feature. Now, to me, as a designer, a sub-feature is something like the gameplay systems, maybe the interaction with core tech, such as the save game, the UI, the assets, the design itself. That's how I, as a designer, think of a sub-feature. So can we find a different name for what you're trying to say? And that's completely valid nomenclature issue. But it actually reveals something a little bit deeper, and it's one of the starting points for why I started thinking about this issue. Game designers design functionality. That's what they do for a living, right? And specialist developers think about the functionality of that game and about their specialist discipline contributions in a functional way. And when we ask them, as producers, to help break down work, it's likely that the way that they will think about that will at least have some of this functional bias in planning. But of course, a sub-feature doesn't just have to be this horizontal functional slice. A sub-feature could be a vertical slice through time, a logistical unit. This is how I, as a producer, think about sub-features. I want to take all of the tasks at any given time and roll them up within a deliverable or user story, all of those user stories, and encapsulate them within a sub-feature or an epic, and then build those together to make up the feature. Right, so there's something more fundamental there than content pipelines or feature maps. There's actually a concept here that if developers tend to think in functional units, we need to help them think in logistical units. Worth repeating that message. If developers tend to think in slices of horizontal functionality across the length of a feature, we should help them think in deliverable vertical slices in time. If you accept that premise, it's not a guarantee, but if you do, the question becomes the subtitle of this talk. How do you get a development team thinking logistically? And by the way, why isn't our Scrum method just doing this for us? So this is what we've been up to for the past couple of years. Some people will say there's a bit too much conflict between traditional methods of Kanban and Sprint Agile with game development. We're a special case. And whilst there's some merit in this, The conclusion I came to is there isn't actually as much discrepancy as sometimes we'd like to believe. They are useful tools, and they do support this concept of logistical thinking at their core. So what's the issue? Well, as I've seen it, we often have built up legacy frameworks that are more functionally biased. Things like definitions of done, team structures, pipelines, that don't always support logistical thinking at their core. And this isn't the textbook method issue, because if you've ever studied Scrum, you've probably seen a diagram something like this. Now, what something like this is trying to get you to do is think about what you can ship, for example, in a 2-week period. You plan it, you execute it, you review it, and you ship it all within that space in time. This is logistical thinking. If you're successful with this delivery, other dependencies can resolve and flow from it. Good use of Kanban. Oh, extra animations, bonus. Good use of Kanban means taking a process, usually a repeatable process, and breaking it down into the stages in time. This is a logistical split of columns that are left to right across the project, and usually you don't see too many horizontally splitting things on a Kanban board. So whilst a Kanban ticket may not progress across the board starting at a specific time or end, it may not require you to align with sprints, it is time limited. Cycle times are at the heart of Kanban. Okay, so if logistical thinking is this concept we want to aim for, and textbook methods that we try and use in our development processes are supporting these, but it's not quite happening for us, maybe we need a new question. What is the starting point for helping a development team think logistically? And the answer I came up with was to start the processes again with deliverables at the center. That is, start all the processes again and put deliverables at the heart of that. So why did I choose deliverables for this process, and who should have them? Well, the why is fairly straightforward. If we can experience success at this level as a team, then we'll be able to take features, content, anything you like, and break those down through the hierarchy, but have an understanding of where we're aiming. Deliverables, in this sense, can link the day-to-day of what the team's doing, that's their tasks, through the deliverable structure into the broader vision of the product backlog. And of course, yes, the team experiences deliverables fast enough to get familiar with them. They also experience tasks fast enough to be familiar with them. But we don't want to choose tasks, because that would encourage a tick box mentality, and that's something we're looking to avoid. So this is why we want to become deliverable-centric. And I also firmly believed that choosing this structure would allow us to remain flexible on methods per strike team. Some teams could work in Scrum, some in Scrumban, and maybe some even in waterfall methodology. And deliverables could support all of these things at the same time. So if everything's going to be based on deliverables, can we just check who should have them? Well, everyone should have deliverables. I'm sure we've all worked on projects where the extent of deliverables, maybe in a live title, is for the public-facing things, or in development title, maybe it's your contract document or your most important deliverables. And we often don't consider that outside of those, teams like project directors, producers, QA should have any deliverables at all. It's often true for tech teams as well. If they're paying down technical debt or building specific tools, maybe they don't feature on your deliverable list. But we're going to change that. Now, everyone should have deliverables. A producer needs to make a specific strike team roadmap, make a deliverable for it. A tech director needs to make a networking presentation, make a deliverable for that too. An Unreal Curve editor, an error reporting upgrade, a foliage optimization pass, deliverable, deliverable, deliverable. Everyone should have them. And if you work with the external, internal, and stretch goal model, you can achieve it without cluttering up your client-facing or public-facing deliverable lists. You can filter where external is that set of work that is most important to your public-facing or client-based scenario. But you're not hiding the rest, the internals. You're just saying, honestly, we think you're more likely to care about this narrative treatment than this optimization system. Internally to the project, you're going to review everything, because as developers, it's our responsibility not to get disproportionately focused on the flashy and showy, but on the full spectrum of things needed to ship a title. And of course, we don't want the team just focusing milestone to milestone either on their current deliverables, we need the team striving and remaining ambitious. And we can use stretch goals to achieve that. Maybe a landscape authoring tool is tight for this sprint or milestone. But if we set it as a stretch goal, we can keep this team striving to work at the highest velocity possible. So narrative treatment, external, optimization system, internal, landscape authoring tool, stretch. Simple, and now everyone can have deliverables. And this model of external, internal, and stretch is actually a good bridge between these next two sections, because it doesn't just help deal with the who should have deliverables, but I also consider it good practice for deliverables. And a good deliverable is what we'll look at next. This is a fairly extensive section, so we'll take it bit by bit. If step one of this process was getting deliverables to be for everyone, then step two is about making them genuinely deliverable, and this is achieved in two ways. Most importantly is the approach to acceptance criteria and the general pipeline, and we'll come to those shortly. But for now, I'm going to look at the grouping approach of tasks within deliverables and how this provides the key to backlog structure. When we break down a feature into sub-features and eventually into deliverables, we want those deliverables to then have all of the work needed to complete them, a true multidisciplinary way of thinking. And we require that all of these disciplines get their work from this location and only from this location. So we want all the tasks within this deliverable, not in some separate discipline backlog. Let's have a look at an example of a backlog I don't like. Now, I've done many of these things, and I will probably do them again, and I'm sure some of you have done this too. We've got some features and deliverable and theme level items here that are specific to disciplines, something I've just said we won't do. So we don't like these. And one of the issues here, if we just focus in on that concept deliverable there, is what do you do if a new piece of work comes in? Do you put it in one of these buckets? And if so, how do you deliver that? We need deliverables that can be completed and closed and don't come back for more work, not just buckets into which additional emergent work gets assigned. There's also a good standby here that I'm sure all of us have used at some point, the concept of part one and part two for deliverables and tasks to make them fit into sprints. No, rubbish, don't do it. If you can't meaningfully split your work into sprints and have a concept that's actually genuinely deliverable, maybe you shouldn't be using sprint-based methodology, maybe Kanban. We've also got some redundant levels of the hierarchy here, weapons for demo and demo weapons. Pretty sure we've all done that sort of thing as well. And for me, this represents a team that's probably unfamiliar with what it's aiming for to break down a backlog in a consistent way. It's another reason why I advocate starting with deliverables, because if we can build a consistent picture of what that looks like, we've got a chance of building a better backlog, a backlog that might look something like this. Now, there's something really pleasing about this sort of backlog where everything needed to complete a piece of work is contained in the same place. And that is, it's now possible to link our exact game design and the structure of, say, our Confluence and game design to our product backlog. They shouldn't be different, they should be exactly the same. Here, all the tasks needed to create this assault rifle are stored within the deliverables, within the sub-features, within that one feature. And these things are all genuinely deliverable. If we zoom in on these deliverables briefly, all the tasks from all the disciplines required to execute them are placed here. And certain dependencies are dealt with. For example, in deliverable 1, we do the proxy mesh. In deliverable 2, we rig that mesh. In deliverable 3, we do some placeholder animations on that mesh. But if we encapsulate all of these deliverables into its sub-feature, the assault rifle to intermediate, we also have a logistically based unit. Once you've completed this work, that weapon is ready for user testing. And that's a genuine, useful project dependency, which is the sort of thing that logistical thinking should get you to. Zooming back out, it's also possible to defend against functional thinking creeping back in. Maybe a concept art person comes along and says, well, can we not just have a concept art phase, or maybe a concept art deliverable? By now you should be thinking, is that really logistical thinking, or is that just their discipline function looking for their own bucket of work? Perhaps we should be splitting the work like this instead. For that initial prototype at first look, maybe a sketch design. We were only making a proxy in that intermediate. Maybe refined color sketches is enough. So we only really need to do this final render at the start of our main production phase as we're approaching alpha. Okay, now we've got a chance to take user feedback into account and all the learning we have on the title to that date before committing to a particular piece of art. It's less likely to need redoing. You'll also notice in this structure that specialist disciplines like concept art, VFX, audio, they don't have one neat backlog themselves where they can evaluate their work. And this is by design. And it's what it means to deliver your deliverables. You need to compromise elsewhere and not here. This product backlog needs to match this kind of structure. So in this case, you need to find other solutions to these emergent problems. Maybe it's a dashboard which takes all of the tasks from all over the place for animation and lists them in one simple place for the lead to assess and check the work. Or maybe you dedicate an art producer who looks at this situation across the entire project. So if you're still with me that deliverables are a good thing and they're a good way to get a development team thinking in this logistical fashion, we need to know what a good one looks like. So firstly, you might be asking, why not just use user stories? Well, for me, the format's ripe for imprecision. They can be really good, but for example, as a developer, I want a design for my vehicle so I can implement it. Well, do you? What a stunning revelation, right? Of course you do. I could just write a task which says, design X vehicle, give it to a designer, and we'd be as far along, right? But we are missing some information here to integrate other strike teams within the project, to integrate QA. Information like, what pipeline is it following? Who signs it off? So what could some of these rules for what a good deliverable needs look like? It should include where the work is located. Is it in this level, in an editor or package? Is it a Miro board? Is it a Confluence page? Is it an Excel document you're going to place in this particular folder? List that out. You need to describe what the work is going to be. Now, in my opinion, you don't need a why. You can just say, we're going to make this vehicle to block out quality. Done. One or more test cases so that the team can evaluate their work and so that QA can test it. Who will sign off this work? And we should include references to pipelines, exceptions, and additions. So let's look at an example. Maybe you've built a tool, a blockout scale tool, and the time has come to build some benchmark examples so that new people on your project can understand how to use it. Now, this is a deliverable ticket, but probably quite hard to read, so let's zoom in. Woohoo! So the location is the blockout testbed map in the mainline editor. That's where the work will be found. And the description is a new map section is or will be created to showcase benchmark examples of the tool. Perfect, one sentence nails that. Then we've got some test cases. I just want to draw your attention to the last one of these test cases. This is an example of the art form of writing good deliverables, where you're precise in some places and loose in others. We've said at least one example of a simple static mesh and one example of a more complex static mesh imported from elsewhere. And that, combined with sign-off, here, a designer, means that we're empowering the team to go beyond a minimum bar. It's perfect that we've set a minimum bar, but the team should be able to say, now I've started this work, maybe there's 3 or 4 examples of each, maybe I've discovered a new archetype. The sign-off of this deliverable in those terms is as importantly defined by the people owning the work and signing it off as it is by the specific acceptance criteria. And this is one of the ways we can avoid that tick box mentality. Quite a lot of important stuff on one card there. Let's have a look at another example, one including a pipeline this time, and we'll zoom in again. This time we're saying it's in the mainline package, used in a first publishable demo, and also placed in a test map. Fine. The description is, we'll do the plasma mist spell to the first look definition of the powers pipeline. And our first test case is simply reiterating that fact with hyperlinks to that design and to that pipeline. And in this case, those documents are supporting writing good, coherent deliverables. But there may be some additions or exceptions. Here we've said VFX additionally should be representative. Maybe normally, at this stage of the pipeline, you don't need any effects, or at least very placeholder effects. But since this is a mist spell, the whole thing is a VFX. So maybe we can ask for this to be in line with the alpha definition from the pipeline, even at this early stage. And again, we've got some sign-off criteria, and we're saying QA works in line with the pipeline definitions. Now, you've noticed maybe that I've used first look here. I referred to first look and intermediate in my backlog examples. These might be definitions of done you have on the product. There's not time here. I could do a whole talk on definitions of done. I'm sure there's people here who know I could. But I will briefly show an example of a framework that fits on one page. Now, the detail of this example is not important, but I'm sure we've worked on projects where definitions of done run to pages and pages and pages of specific criteria. In this structure, you don't need it, because if definitions of done can be frameworks that are overridden by pipeline documents that maintain the spirit of the definition but add the specifics, and then deliverables, as we've just seen, can add additions and exceptions themselves and override those pipelines, then we really only need to conceive of these frameworks in a way that supports writing good deliverables and understand that those deliverables can always override other documentation in this format. Whew. Made it. We touched there on how to write good deliverables, and before that, how to use them as a way to influence good backlog structure. But we also briefly touched on distributing ownership via deliverables, and if you'll indulge me, I'd just like to go on a slight aside to touch on that a little bit further. So let's consider a situation where a senior artist has been listed as a sign-off person on a deliverable, and they've done so, and then an art director is really annoyed that they have signed it off. In this structure that we've just described, the art director doesn't have the power to reopen this deliverable for feedback after it's been signed off. As a producer, you would say no. Now, you might provide them a feedback deliverable that they can put their extra work into, and I'd encourage you to do this, but the chances are, if this comes up, they're going to be really annoyed, and that senior artist might wonder what on earth they were doing as the sign-off person anyway. They feel undermined. So that didn't go very well. Oh dear. Now, if this happens a few times, you might get pressure from senior members of your staff, or you may feel pressure yourself to adjust those sign-off processes, to add extra steps. And I'm going to say, don't do this. Do not do this. We want to build deliverable processes first, with deliverables at the center, and adjust our other processes to fit. Either, in this case, the art director should have been listed as the sign-off person on that deliverable. It was important enough to them. And in that case, they should have attended more of the scrums and interacted directly with the team and had their influence in that way. Or, more likely, everything was fine about the sign-off and the approach. The issue was with the visibility and comms on the team, the one-to-ones that didn't happen, the show and tells that didn't happen that would have allowed this issue to be picked up sooner. So let's see how this might have gone better. By bringing this issue to a one-to-one early, these two can collaborate on the issue. They can work ahead of time, and the art director can align things more with their vision. But also, the sign-off still rests with the senior artist, who can carry that new understanding of the vision further. So in this case, people feel they have appropriate influence and autonomy. And notice, production are nowhere near this process. We don't need to be, and that's a good thing. So if that went better, what are the key takeaways? You need to understand that project management processes work together with interpersonal management processes, but they are separate. And you shouldn't be using project management process alterations to act as sticking plasters for interpersonal management issues. We want to strive to keep our project management processes as clean and simple as possible to solve the issues where they actually exist. Okay, let's move on to a general pipeline. It's fairly straightforward. I'll show you the whole thing. Ta-da! But then we'll zoom back out and take it step by step. So a backlog item is conceived when someone comes up with an idea like, we should do this work, maybe Plasma Mist First Look again, for example. At this stage, it may not have a design or acceptance criteria or a concrete costing, but that's okay. You do these things when you prepare the deliverable. Preparation in this sense means aligning the deliverable to the standards we've set out today before we move into execution. And we should also do a refined capacity analysis or some sort of effort breakdown to understand how long it's going to take. So then we move it into the working backlog of a team, a sprint backlog or a Kanban working backlog. And the statuses here will be broadly familiar to everyone. I won't dwell on them. But as you near the end of that process, you move towards review. Now, for me, this isn't a separate stage, but a combined cyclical stage alongside execution. You want the ability to iterate there and then to achieve quality so that the sign-off person has confidence we've reached a sufficient quality bar and that they have the autonomy to decide what that is. So hopefully in your cycle times or your sprint planning, you leave room for this. And you should also leave room for every deliverable to go to QA. At a minimum, QA can say the deliverable is where it's supposed to be and that the person responsible for signing it off has done so, but they should also be doing important checks like, is this going wrong for other people on the project? Are you about to disrupt something else when you submit this? And more importantly, if you've got repeatable pipelines like that Plasma Mist example, you can dedicate QA members to become expert in that pipeline as well, and they'll know what tests to perform when you get something to that stage. Therefore, you can improve your quality by getting bugs that are more relevant to the team than can be achieved through generalized testing alone. But assuming all of this goes swimmingly, you now move on to something being done. And in this context, as I've said, done means done. You can't undeliver a deliverable. If you need more work in a specific area, you should be making a new backlog item, a new deliverable that draws from your contingency or boots things off the bottom of your backlog priority list. Last bit, integration with common process. Let's consider a situation where we've got 3 milestones, 6 weeks each, 2 weeks for 3 sprints in each milestone. Now, sprint is fairly straightforward here. You make deliverables that fit within sprints, okay? And if they're in the last sprint of a milestone, we can mark them as stretch. That's fine, and this is a good plan of record, but remember, an agile team might pivot after any given sprint in any case, but this works well. Kanban, we can do similar. We don't have to align with sprint start and end, but we can also use variable length deliverables that exceed that length. And for me, this is the solution to that part 1 and part 2 problem we had earlier. If you can't meaningfully split the work, maybe you should be using a technique like this. Now, whilst the milestone cadence isn't at the heart of what this team is doing, you can still look at the cycle times or the projected length and just assign to your milestones based on where they land in the cadence. And you can do exactly the same thing with waterfall as well. If you list out your key dependencies as deliverables or similar, then you can assign to milestones based on where they land. All right, let's recap. I think logistical thinking is pretty snazzy, and for me, it represents the brass tacks of what these textbook methods are trying to get you to achieve. I'll say if you want to really reinforce those methods in your team, using deliverables as we've laid them out today is a great starting point. And we can do this to improve autonomy on the team. We can use direct correlation with our product backlog and our game design to allow stakeholder level staff to have confidence and visibility and influence over a wide range of things. But we can give specific ownership to team members and strike teams and use minimum bars in acceptance criteria to encourage them to come up with emergent quality requirements on their own. And we can also allow them to choose their own project management method, as we've just seen, or try a few different ones. When we give the team time to iterate and we integrate QA meaningfully into our cycle, we'll improve quality. We all work with fantastic developers. We just need to give them that full opportunity. And if build quality improves quickly, a lot of other noise on your project tends to go away. And all of this together will increase dev team buy-in. I actually had a recent starter say something to me which I'm quite proud of, which is a good summary for this. They said, Chris, it's just nice to come on a project where the process overhead is clear to me and understood, but otherwise I'm left to own and focus on what I'm good at, what I enjoy doing. That for me is winning. So if you're sold, a final word of warning. It's easy to talk about these things, but we've been at it for 2 years and we're by no means the finished article. Implementation is so hard. But if you stick at it, build allies, and keep the goal in mind, it's possible to use deliverables like these to get a dev team thinking logistically. Thank you very much. Question time. No one wants to ask a question. Cesar's got a question.
That was great, Chris. This is more of a leading question, because I want you to talk about it. But, I mean, when you talk about deliverables and that everyone should have a deliverable, we face that issue at points where we would have a milestone deliverables that was facing the client, and then we would have our MIT that was for the internal team, and those didn't match. And we saw great advantages when we actually started to match every deliverable from one side to the other. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a great point, Says. So one of the things I'm advocating here, but this really is a lightning speed overview of the whole process, is if you can line up your product backlog and your game design, but also then have those deliverables directly tied to the things you put in your milestone document or schedule. So you're not making up separate things just to satisfy what you need to do in any given moment. Then you're not doing 3 sets of admin, and actually what the team are delivering becomes directly relevant to burning off your product backlog and directly relevant to what you've said you need to achieve in your game design. I'm actually going to drop Bryony in it here in a positive way and say I got a message the other day from our design director who's actually giving another talk right now, which said, Bryony's really smashing this, the backlog looks great. Now, how often does a design director feel the need to unprompted just say, this backlog looks great? But this is what's happening when you start to have this format, because what they're seeing is the vision of their game design is actually implemented in the backlog and is actually what we're delivering milestone to milestone if we get it right. So that's one of the reasons it's really worth investing in these things, is because you can build dev team buy-in with that approach. Good question. Anyone else?
Hi. How would you recommend getting other teams started on this when they don't have you?
How do you start without me? Well, you certainly don't steal any of my excellent team that are here today, which, by the way, is a little bit like rushing home to watch Match of the Day after watching the game live, but I appreciate the support. I think this is a framework. I know that you've got people like James, Jess here, members of PMO, who are keen to expand the framework of shared knowledge. Maybe have a chat with them about what their vision is for how we move these things. To be honest, this is a suggestion for a coherent way to go about your work. It's not mandated, but I think you'll have difficulty if you only take little bits of this process. For me, it was about starting again and putting deliverables first. So I'm happy to help. I think there are a number of great people here who kind of get this stuff too and have lived it for long enough. Doing it from scratch is really hard. There's a reason we've been at it for a couple of years, and you always put the game first. So if there's any point at which nailing your process or nailing the game is in conflict, you're always going to prioritize the game and sacrifice the process. And that's the right thing to do. So it just takes forever. Happy to help. Talk to me afterwards at Commune when I've had a few drinks, and maybe I'll commit myself to something I shouldn't. Yes, question over there. Get Duncan running. Don't actually run. I don't know if that's a health and safety issue.
Question about the bucket tasks you mentioned previously. So one of the reasons of appearance is bucket task for concept or code or whatever is actually you've got 1 or 2 guys who doesn't fit into other deliverables, and you still need or want to keep them busy. And you come up with a task, it's not enough for deliverable for them to keep busy, but you still want to have them doing some valuable work. How to deal with this case, with this situation?
So if I understand the question correctly, you've got some people who need some work, and there isn't really an actual place to put them right now, but you know they need to do work, so you build buckets to build this out. To be honest, I've done it, we've all done it, we'll do it again. Like, I'm saying that's not ideal in this process and saying it's forbidden, but in an ideal structure, you would still give them a goal. Maybe you'll have a sub-feature that's a bucket, but what is their actual ambition right now? Is it just do some drawings, or is there actually something you can say, this concept artwork will at least contribute to this understanding on macro theming, or its explorations that are designed to do this? And when are they expected to finish? So if you're going to bucket things up in that way, try to avoid it if possible, because you're not burning down backlog items specifically at that point. But if you had to, I would say maybe make a backlog level item at the sort of theme level or something like that. The one I put the yellow triangle down next, not the big red X. And then, try and build some deliverables that have goals for that individual, maybe, which says, I want you to come up with 3 versions of sketches that show seasons in this map environment. And then they can have tasks to do each of those things and feedback and run it the same way. Ideally, you don't just have a deliverable which says, general concept art we don't know about yet, and that you just keep adding to. That's what I'm advocating for. The real world is a little bit less clear-cut than that. Sean.
Hi, awesome talk. I'm excited to watch it again, actually. But I was wondering, with your deliverables, how come you chose not to put the why and link it to vision or anything like that?
It's a good question, and I've probably got an issue here where I missed a section of my talk, so great for reminding me. You can use why, and that traditionally comes through user stories. And actually, the other things I've listed as acceptance criteria there could be specific conditions of satisfaction. And conditions of satisfaction, if you've read around the topic, are designed to deal with some of that vagueness I'm trying to avoid. So you absolutely could say why, just isn't absolutely required for me. Like if you've listed out a pipeline that explains what a blockout is of a level and what a mid-level stage is and what an alpha stage is, do I really want to be speaking to my creative person and saying, really need a reason to move this level to block out? Like, can you just tell us why you want it? Well, to finish the game, obviously. So yes, reasons why can be really good context. And if you want to do it, there's nothing to stop you in this structure. I just don't think it's like absolutely a requirement.
Oh, awesome, thanks.
Any more for any more? There's one more. How are we doing for time? There's two more. Have I got time for this? No, go to Joe. Go to Joe. I'll stick around, but the tech guys might want me to clear off.
I was just wondering about tasks that don't necessarily have an expected or defined outcome. So like R&D type stuff that's like, I was in network code talk this morning, and I imagine that took a lot of investigation and didn't even know which direction they were going in.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of work involved.
Yeah, this is a really good question. So a question on like when you don't have a clear direction, how can you articulate tasks or deliverables that still do that? And to be honest, this is the art form. This is where you need to work out how to be specific in some places about you are going to do a presentation that lands here that shows your findings. You are going to do these things, but some of the test cases are woolly as anything. It's like you will try and find investigations on bandwidth or on packet size, but we're not going to detail what a good outcome for that is because no one can know. So there is a real art form in writing deliverables that don't pre-imagine what the outcome is. It gives the room and autonomy to the team to actually do the bit of work and define that for themselves as they go and the flexibility, but you're still clear cut on roughly when they need to present and what the format of that is going to look like. So that's how I'd look to solve that problem. But to be honest, we still get that sort of thing wrong all the time. So that's why it's a process. Should we say one more?
I'll be the last one. Thank you for this presentation. It was very valuable. One question from me is regarding that you have mentioned that you create the deliverables. Deliverables are distributed among the team. Every person takes from the bucket. But in cases, the ownership of the deliverable has to pass to another person for one reason or another. Changes in the project, changes in the development, it can be various. Should the deliverable be updated, or is it better to create a new one that respects the changes?
So when you've got ownership moving across different points, should you be transferring ownership or should you be creating new deliverables? I would hope in general that your deliverable lengths aren't so long that anyone could like leave or transfer in such a time frame that the defined owner or owning team, because actually you often give deliverables to a whole strike team, would change that radically. If you're finding deliverables need to pass between strike teams a lot, maybe there's an issue with your backlog structure, but even if there's not, maybe you build the stages of deliverables so that each one can be passed to a given team. Maybe you have the gameplay development in one place alongside the art and so forth of an item, but the UI is dealt with by a separate strike team over here. And the ownership of like the sub-feature or feature transfers, but the specific deliverable, ideally, I mean, if you're working in a sprint method, it's 2 weeks. Really, that shouldn't need handing off that often. Ideally, it's within a team. If we're talking about specific tasks within a deliverable, I would expect that the game designer, the environment artist, the VFX artist all look at that deliverable and take ownership for their specific work. But you're probably going to make that game designer the owner and maybe a lead designer the sign-off person for that piece of work. So that's how I'd see that working. Thank you. Right, I think that'll do. Let's all go to commune and eat lots of food. Thanks very much, everyone.